Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Tuesday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky. It's Graydon time for the offseason. We've reached August. How have the Lakers done according to at least one pundit? That's next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers first listen of every day, Monday through Friday, no matter how or where you get your podcasts. This one's always going to be free. It is never going to be behind a paywall. Of course, Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go hang out with over 36,000 subscribers to the channel, Andy. Many of whom are also, subscribers to the audio version of the product, of course, which you can get on Apple. That's probably our most common platform when people find us, Apple Podcasts, but also to Spotify or wherever you like to do these sorts of things. Got a lot of ground to cover today, but do want to tell you first that today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50%, I should say, off your first year. So we'll get into what Rob Pelinka thinks of the offseason. He did talk about that at Saturday's press conference, what the ceiling might be for the Lakers. Still want to talk a little bit about the value of training camp, which we'll get to, if not today, over the course of the week, Andy. But I want to start with, it's kind of, we've reached the point of the offseason where everybody can kind of sort of reflect a little bit. Most of the big business is done. Luca has signed his extension on Monday. De'Aaron Fox got a max deal with the Spurs. The big names are either off the market or, Andy, are expected to, we know what team they're going to go to at some point.
Or they're Jonathan Kuminga, Josh Giddey, and a couple other guys, and they're just sort of stuck in purgatory hell.
Right. I was thinking of the free agents, that are expected to move teams. Maybe Kuminga might move teams. But basically, Al Horford, if he doesn't retire, is waiting to become a Warrior.
He might retire by the time the Warriors figure out this Kuminga thing that's holding up him signing with the Warriors.
Same with DeAnthony Melton. So again,
he's only in his early 30s, and he might retire by the time this thing is done.
We all might retire Jonathan Kuminga might have to retire by the time this thing is done. It is one of these times, though, where you can look back on the offseason and kind of evaluate how things have gone. And to that end, Andy, our friend Dan Wakey, who was a guest on your Lakers talk show on 710 ESPN on Monday night, he has weighed in with a grade. All the folks, the beat writers at The Athletic, turning in one for their respective covers. Dan gives the Lakers a B-. Your thoughts, Andy?
First, I'll read his rationale for the B- before I even get into what I think of Dan's
before
grade.
I tear into him.
Well, I just want to give people the full context before I rip Dan a new one, especially since he was kind enough to appear on my show. I feel like I owe him that much. Quote, the challenge in grading the Lakers offseason is whether to hold them to the relative scale of what they're trying to accomplish or whether to grade them against the rest of the league. In particular, their rivals in the West. If it's regarding what they were trying to accomplish, it's hard to think of a way they could have done better than Deandre Ayton, Jake LaRavia, and Marcus Smart without sacrificing draft picks or significant assets. If it's against the rest of the West, you can't say on paper that they've kept up with the Houston Rockets, Denver Nuggets, or maybe even the LA Clippers. But an offseason isn't just about which players come in and which ones are lost. There's other stuff to Luka Dončić extension and role in signing Ayton and Smart bodes well for a long-term relationship between the organization and the star. The ownership sale to Mark Walter at $10 billion valuation should eventually give the team every financial tool and then some. The awkwardness with LeBron James is less than ideal, but on the whole, the Lakers got better this summer in more than one way. And what I think is interesting about the way Dan frames this is how you could look at this on the micro level, sort of the present level, and the 5,000-foot view level. Mm-hmm. And all of those different ways would be totally valid. But depending on the way you decided to look at it or what you decided to focus on most, the grades could completely vary. Like from a 5,000-foot view, it's an A because they locked up Luca. Like that was the number one goal of this offseason. And if it did not happen, that's like a holy bleep. What do? We need to handle this very carefully, very delicately, and we have no flipping clue how. Because like
you're Kevin Bacon at the end of Animal House. All is well, all is well.
Yeah,
Remain calm.
It would have been very tenuous heading into this season with Luca not locked up. I mean, that could radically affect a lot of decisions that you make just over the course of this season, much less beyond. That's handled in that respect. The Lakers, you could argue, get an A or an A plus because they have a generational superstar now locked up for at least
locked up after being the first day, a summer of recruiting, all that stuff. That portion of the offseason, I agree with you, A plus.
But then when you start thinking about the grades in making the roster as competitive as it needs to be for this season, which would have included Luca with or without the extension because he's still under contract for next year, you start getting into a tricky area. And this is something I talked about a little bit with Dan tonight in the show, among other things, including the awkwardness with LeBron, which he addressed, and maybe we'll talk about during the show. But the question of how to grade the Lakers, or whether it's more important to grade them against the rest of the league versus what they were realistically capable of doing, I think is really critical. And I don't even know if there's a right answer. But like, for example, if you think Houston made the biggest offseason move by acquiring Kevin Durant, and you can certainly make a very strong case for that, Durant can only go to one team. And the Lakers were in no realistic position to acquire Durant at all. Like that was not going to happen for them. So to some degree, like, I guess you can penalize them for not getting Durant, but that seems kind of unfair and even pointless. They were arguably not in the position to do some of the things around the league that other teams did, like Atlanta getting Nickeil Alexander-Walker. The Lakers were not going to be able to create the cap space to pay what he ended up getting from the Hawks. Like, not possible. So how much do you weigh the idea of what was realistically possible versus what was realistically necessary?
I think the basic framework that Dan is setting up here is correct. I think, there are really two things you're grading. Are you grading the idea that the Lakers kept up with the Joneses? Because in that case, no, not quite. Denver, I think, advanced a little farther than the Lakers did. And you could argue if all was sort of well and everybody's healthy, maybe they're a little bit better. If for no other reason, they have Nikola Jokic. But the teams won the same amount of games last year. So there is that. I think Houston, who won a couple more games than the Lakers did, quite literally, they won 52. The Lakers won 50. I think Houston had overall a more transformative offseason. They kept, I think the most important young players that they had, got rid of a number one option in Jalen Green, who was, I think could still be a good player, but is just not reliable in that role. And they replaced him with arguably the best pure offensive player of this generation in Kevin Durant, who is still really good. But they kept Thompson, they kept Şengün, they kept Jabari Smith Jr. Like the architecture of that young team, all of those guys, all of them are still on the team. Dylan Brooks will hurt, but they got a lot of ways to replace him. So, did Houston had a little better of an offseason. I like what the Clippers did. I think the Clippers, as they exist on paper, I love what how they transformed their starting lineup. I love the addition of John Collins. I think they traded Norm Powell at the right time, and reworked the lineup in that way. I think Lopez is a great addition to what they want to do behind Zoo and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, the Lakers did well, but are probably a little further behind the best teams in the West than they were before, but they could have been a lot further behind had they not done certain things. And I find there's an interesting sort of the other side of this. If you look at like ESPN's running grades that they have for all the big moves made this offseason, kind of reflects the positive side of this. We'll get to it next.
Locked on Lakers is brought to you by 5-Hour Energy Drink. It is time to fuel up and turn it up with 5-Hour Energy Transfusion. It combines the grape, ginger, and lime flavors of your favorite golf drink into a quick, energizing shot. And whether you're sinking birdies or just making memories with friends, it is a hole-in-one for your energy game, because you never know when that perfect shot is just around the corner. I firmly believe the reason golf is so addictive to so many different people of so many different levels is every now and then a rank amateur will hit a shot that honestly a pro could not have done any better. I'm not a very good golfer, but I have hit those kind of shots on occasions. But you got to be ready and energized for that moment. Transfusion's grape, ginger, and lime flavor gives you the best parts of your clubhouse go-to drink without chasing down the bev cart. So go to 5hourenergy.com. That's the number 5hourenergy.com. You can use the promo code LOCKEDONGolf to receive 20% off your order. And the order is only valid through September 30th for one order. It cannot be used with other promotions, and the code is not good for subscription orders. Whether you're meeting up with your friends or trying to turn 18 holes into 36, get the energizing boost you need to power through. Order transfusion-flavored 5-Hour Energy shots today.
So the flip side, Andy. Oh, and you know what? I wanted to ask you something, because you did this on Saturday when we did our reaction to the press conference and the signing and the extension for Luca. You did this on Saturday. I heard you do it again on your Lakers Talk show. We were both in studio together at ESPN, and then you did it again. You referred to this as the beginning of the Luca era, like the Luca era is here. Do you not count the part that, because technically speaking, the Luca era began at the trade deadline or close to it? It's an interesting distinction. I think I understand what you're getting at, but I wanted to ask you what you mean by that.
I mean it more in just the celebratory. He is here. We know that the commitment is mutual. We know that Luka wants to be a Laker for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Like, obviously the time that he played from February through April counts. Like it will go down on everybody's permanent record. But it was also during a very tenuous period where Luka was coming off an injury. He missed a certain amount of time. He didn't have a proper center to be working with. He and LeBron and Austin Reeves and Rui and JJ Redick, like nobody really had enough time to work together. We were starting from a period that was exciting because they just traded for Luka, and between February and April, and then between April and where we are now, there had never been any indications that Luka was looking elsewhere once he was able to leave. But it never felt official until August 2nd, the day I deemed unofficially, until I guess Karen Bass signs off on it, Luka Day. August 2nd, I have declared Luka Day. And that was the day where things really felt like, okay, the Lakers and Luka are officially moving forward, especially since it very much felt like it was part of a buildup that was from Luka by design. Like he wanted to help hype this moment for the franchise, for his teammates, for Laker fans. So yes, the stuff before then, it counts, obviously, but the Luka era to me really feels like now moving forward, because if for no other reason, everybody's on the same page with planning.
Everybody's on the same page. This is why I think it's kind of a fun distinction to make, because like this is the beginning of the part where the Lakers can control what they do with the roster, specifically for Luka. They kind of tried with the Williams thing. They decided it was a bad idea after looking at some pictures of what's going on inside Mark Williams' body. And then they were sort of hamstrung from there. But like, this is the first stretch of time where they will go into the, they did an off season with how do we do things to best suit Luka now and in the future? How do we create a team that's competitive this year, but also works for Luka? Which free agents do we get to build a team around Luka and all these other things? And, thinking about a full training camp with Luka, the signing of him and all this stuff. This is the part that like counts. Like, this is the stuff where you're really able to tilt the thing and open up a new era in the franchise. And I don't know if that's exactly what you were thinking, but when you said it on Saturday, I was like, oh, like, that's interesting. I know he's not counting. It's like the stupid thing where you say the playoffs don't start until somebody wins on the other team's floor. No, they start at game one. Like, that's when they begin. But in this particular case, like, when you talk about the beginning of an era, you can certainly argue it starts when the team really orients everything and is able to orient everything they're doing toward one person.
Well, this is an interesting comment from Lion King. Luka era. What players can he recruit? How can the players play, like in style? How the Lakers rank in the standings? The part that jumped out at me from that comment from Lion King was just the idea that Luka will recruit players, and he has recruited players. He helped recruit DeAndre Ayton. He was key in recruiting Marcus Smart. That, to me, again, feels like the Luka era officially beginning, because he obviously had agency with the franchise from the moment he arrived, but he is now able to help put his stamp on things and help create the personality of this team in ways that aren't limited to just how he plays on the court with everything thrown together on the fly.
It's just something I wanted to ask that's kind of stuck out on Saturday, so I held on to it until today. But yeah, it's an interesting framing. And I think it's actually a pretty good one, because this is, last year counted, but this year is I do think you could say is the true beginning of the Luka era in LA. So anyway, back to what we were talking about before in terms of grading this offseason and what the Lakers have done and all that. You mentioned that Dan Wakey, with a very reasonable and well thought explanation, gave them a B-. I think the B- part, the lower part of that grade, the sort of that he's framing there, comes from, okay, you got probably a little bit worse in the conference. Like, if you're making preseason rankings, the Lakers are not going to be second or third on most people's lists. They're going to be fifth, sixth, seventh, probably in there, I think, on most preseason rankings, which is pretty good in that conference, but not second, third, whatever. But if you look at the big moves that they made, the individual moves that they made, those all rate pretty highly. If you go look, ESPN has this thing that they post at the beginning of the offseason, and they leave it up for the rest of the time, grading every significant move. And if you look at what they did with Marcus Smart, Lakers get a B. Pretty good. It's not bad. And I think that's fair. Smart is an upgrade that comes with some degree of risk. Even Rob Pelinka admitted, that you're looking at a guy who maybe has a little chip on his shoulder after a couple down seasons and wants to show people that he is still a DPOY type guy, that better than a buyout and all that kind of stuff. Getting bought out tends to get under good players' skin, no question. If you look at what they said about DeAndre Ayton, that got a B+ from ESPN. Again, the level of production at that price, filling a gigantic hole for the Lakers, like that, rated quite well. And then the other big move that they made was Jake LaRavia, and that got a B+. And I am actually really high on that. So when you put all these things together, like the individual players that they brought in should be good fits. And then when you think about what they were able to do with what was available to them, I think it's fair to say, like, you get maybe a C for keeping up with the conference, But maybe, I'm just saying, but an A, or A minus, C plus, whatever, however you want to divide it, to something that kind of averages out to a B minus. I think, Dan, whether you think it's a B, whether you think it should be a C plus as a team, whatever, I think the framing kind of works. The Lakers did as well as they could, given what was available to them. I think they, this buyout market of 2025 certainly came at a good time for Rob Pelinka, no question. And then, you can question whether or not they have a better or worse chance of making the Western Conference Finals now than they did at the beginning of the summer. Both those are not mutually exclusive ideas.
Coming up, I'm going to explain why I think Dan's grade is ultimately too low, even though I think he went about trying to do this in a fair way.
Because he's a hack?
No. I mean, he's not a hack, and he is actually fair. I just think he's wrong, and I will explain coming up next. Locked On Lakers is brought to you by Monarch Money. Have you ever wished that managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can be. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. Like my daughter, as an example, she is about to start high school. So it is not too early, and this is crazy, to start thinking about college and tuition and dorm expenses and all sorts of other stuff. And it is honestly overwhelming. But Monarch Money can help me streamline spending, figure out areas where I could be more efficient, and just create a plan. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. So ultimately, I understand where Dan is coming from in the way that he framed this. Like I said, I think he does it in a pretty reasonable way. And I think he identified that the Lakers, depending on which teams you're talking about, may not have kept up with the rest of the teams around the West as well as they have needed to. That being said, though, they did not get actually any worse. I think they actually got better than where they began last offseason. Like, I think they are actually a better team than the one that was a 3 seed that got knocked out by the Wolves in what I think was a combination ultimately of bad matchup, and they did not have a complete enough roster to try to contend with that matchup from the best place of strength. But this team has actually gotten better, even if you feel like they haven't gotten as better as you'd want them to be. I feel like they have gotten as better as was realistically possible for them. And I also don't think the gap between them and whichever teams you think are in front of them is that big, other than OKC, who I think is still the best team in the West by a pretty good margin until I see evidence otherwise. It was exactly, by the way, what you and I both thought heading into last season. We thought they were the best team in the league by a pretty wide margin, and that turned out to be the case. And maybe a little bit with Houston, but again, they were not in a position to do the main thing that put Houston in this position that everyone seems to think they are. They could not get Kevin Durant. From there, I don't think they're that much behind Denver, if at all. I need to see the Clippers actually put this thing on the court as opposed to on paper before I really, frankly, buy into anything.
Kawhi's got to stay healthy. You need Bradley Beal to stay healthy, and so on.
Again, I think the moves that they made all made sense. They have a lot of depth, which could be very important because they're always hurt. But I need to see it actually work and come together in ways that really matter before I start fearing it. Like, again, I respect the work over there. They're a well-run organization. This is not your daddy's Clippers, but they've been like the on-paper team for like 5 years. Minnesota either are basically in neutral. If you think that guys like Terrence Shannon Jr. or Rob Dillingham or Jalen Clark are ready for a role, or they actually took a step backwards because they lost Nickeil Alexander-Walker and have no real way to replace him. And while Anthony Edwards, I believe, will continue to get better, there are some guys on the team, like namely Mike Conley Jr. and Rudy Gobert, that are starting to get older, and they may start becoming a little less reliable. So I guess
I see Minnesota. I see Minnesota as a team that had a worse offseason than the Lakers. But it's also worth noting the Lakers were finished ahead of them in the standings last year. So they're one of the teams that theoretically needs to pass the Lakers. So I would just say Minnesota didn't do anything to get Minnesota. If we're having this conversation in Minnesota, that grade is lower. There's no question.
Right. And again, I know the Wolves took out the Lakers in 5, but the squad that they took out in 5 is not this squad. Like, I'm not even saying the Lakers would beat the Wolves if they rematched these rosters, the one that they played in the playoffs now. I'm just saying I think it would be a different series. At the very least, they're not losing in 5 by as decisive a margin, because one of the big reasons they lost was the lack of any playable size, and that in and of itself has been fixed.
Oh, yeah.
So
I think people are wildly underestimating the impact of Ayton because they don't like Ayton. They don't think he's somebody who's lived up to his potential. They don't, except the Lakers don't need him to be the DeAndre Ayton that everybody thought Phoenix was drafting. He could be exactly the same guy he was last year in Portland, with all the warts and all the motivation issues and all that, and still represent a really big improvement in the Lakers center rotation relative to what they finished the year with.
Let me offer you a middle ground. DeAndre Ayton is not the player that Phoenix thought they were drafting number 1 overall when they could have drafted, I don't know, Luka Dončić. But he's better than the version in Portland that has led to, as Ayton acknowledged in his introductory press conference, him being seen as not a winning player, and it seemed to bother him. Let's just say you get the version that was with Phoenix when they went on that run to the finals in 2021, and that would be somewhere in between the player that Phoenix thought they drafted and probably the worst version of his career in Portland. You get that 2021 version of DeAndre Ayton, that player is going to be extremely useful for the Lakers this coming season. That makes them frankly, a totally different team than they had been post Anthony Davis. They're completely different. And I want to acknowledge there are question marks about Ayton. There are question marks about Smart. There are question marks about Jake LaRavia. We have offered all of those questions. There's going to be the question of whether an Austin Reeves can take yet another step in his development. There's going to be questions about how Rui fits into this mix. There's going to be questions about LeBron James as he turns 41. Can he maintain this thing moving forward? Does shredded, skinny Luca equal more available Luca? JJ Redick's progress as a coach, all of these things exist. I guess I just think there are more questions about some of these other teams that often get acknowledged. So between that and the fact that, again, I think Rob Pelinka did about as good of work as he could have realistically done this offseason. Long way of saying I'd give him a B+ for the offseason.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between Rob's grade, the Lakers' grade. It just depends on what you want to emphasize. And we'll see. We'll see what this looks like. If there is a big variance in what they're going to, the versions of Marcus Smart that they could get. They get last year's Marcus Smart, it's not going to be that helpful. If they get DPOY Marcus Smart, oh man, that's going to make a profound difference in what the Lakers are able to do, because you got to remember too, the trickle down effect. Even if Smart isn't guarding the best wing on the other team, he can't guard, but just having a guy that can be a major improvement as a defensive anchor in the backcourt is going to make that a huge difference. Reality is he's probably somewhere in the middle. Ayton,
which would be an upgrade, by the way, from what they have.
Right, it would be. Ayton, you mentioned the idealized, they get the 2021 version. That would be great. The reality is they probably get something in between the 2021 version and last season. But also, too, remember, he's got to be on any given night, probably he's going to be looked at as the team's fourth best player. And that is a big, like, if Deandre Ayton averages 10 rebounds a game and 11 points a game, nobody's going to complain. Maybe up that block rate a little bit, whatever it might be, look like, show that you can defend the rim a little bit, help anchor a defense that Marcus Smart is making better on the perimeter. Like, that's going to make LeBron better defensively. It's going to make Austin Reeves, who's a very willing and smart defender most of the time, but not built quite literally for chasing around the best player in another team's backcourt. It's just not what he's there to do.
You better be up for the second best.
That's fine. But there's a big difference between the best and the second best. There's a difference in doing it when you have rim protection versus when you don't. And all of this stuff, like, everybody's the effect that Luka is going to have on the offense, which will change the way that the Lakers can play defense. Like, all of these things are, I'm looking forward to training camp, which we'll talk about more in detail tomorrow. I'm looking forward to seeing in training camp, like, how do you use all these parts? How do you design an offense that makes your defense better? How do you maximize the skill set of Luca and LeBron over the course of how many weeks do they have of preseason before you start playing real games? It's like 5 weeks or something like that, 4 weeks, whatever. Like, what can you do with that time to build a new program and a new system? Like, there's so much potential here for the Lakers to be, if nothing else, a very entertaining team. And so I don't think it's fair to grade. It's not fair. It's also not good analysis to grade the Ayton signing on the sort of
which is not what Dan did, just so it's
clear.
I'm
just saying, for the royal observers, all bring in the royal observers, for people to grade the Ayton signing based on the vision of DeAndre Ayton as a number one pick, because that's not who the Lakers signed. Just context matters an incredible amount in professional sports, and contextually, the Lakers are in pretty good shape. And like, I agree with you, did about as well as could reasonably be expected. Bigger moves would have cost them players in the rotation. And if you get a frontline player, but it costs you 3 members of your rotation, including Rui Hachimura, that takes away from the impact of the player that you acquired.
Plus, I think even more importantly, or maybe even more accurately, I don't even know if that type of trade was even available for them in the first place, even if you think that's the better move for them. You just think they should be as top heavy as possible. LeBron, Luca, Austin, incoming guy X, and fill out the rest with Flotsam and Jetsam. I don't even know if that was possible for them, even if they wanted to. Much less a move that was actually worth it, which is the other reason that I think Rob deserves a pretty good grade for the offseason.
I think Rob deserves a very good grade.
But I mean, like, we'll, I'm sure, talk about this, but Dan and I talked a bit on my show about how, among other things, one of the tension points between the Lakers and LeBron, I think, is LeBron wanting them to push all the chips in the middle while he's still there, use that 2031 first, like, go all in. And truth be told, I don't think there's a move that would justify it. And the justification can't be LeBron's about to turn 41. Like, it's really got to make sense. I don't think, for the time being, I don't think there's a move out there that would even justify doing it, regardless of LeBron's situation.
I agree. Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go hang out with over 36,000 subscribers to the channel. Do make sure you're subscribing to the audio version, because you may not always be able to watch us. Download it, subscribe on iTunes, subscribe on Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. We will see everyone tomorrow.